just a couple things before we actually, I guess, officially get started with class. We want to thank you all for being here. For those of you who chose to join us online, thank you so much for being here. We do not take you for granted. We're so thankful that you've chosen to worship with us, and we believe that you are worshiping with us, even if we're not under the same roof. So thank you for hanging around for our class time and being a part of worship as well. Also, just a couple more things I wanted to let you remind you of. We've started a thing on Monday mornings called Verse for the Week, and I talked a little bit about that. We've been introducing just a verse. Sometimes it's a couple of verses, and it's just something we want to encourage you to spend time just praying over, meditating over. In our household, Jennifer, she likes to have her verse up printed off, and she puts it on the mirror. And so obviously she spends a lot more time in front of the mirror than I do. And so she's able to look at that and read that every morning. And so that's something that she does. Others of you, it can be something where you can go on your phone and you can just listen to it played over and over again. I just want to encourage you to spend time in the Word this year. I just think it's helpful. Tim and I had a conversation about this last week. And he said, you know what, it's when we're in those difficult times, it's those verses that we have prayed over and meditated over. Those are the things that can come back and comfort us in difficult times. And so I want to encourage you to consider doing that. So tomorrow sometime, I don't have a specific time, but sometime tomorrow morning before noon, I'll post it usually lasts less than 2 minutes. It's just a little Facebook post, and share the verse for the week. If you have a verse for the week, I would love for you to share it with me. And I would love for you to say why it means so much to you, and it's why you want to share it with others. So I want to encourage you to do that as well. So what we're going to do now, I want to start off by reading a story that was actually written years and years ago. It's really not attributed to anyone, but later on somebody attached the name Joshua Harris to it. I don't know for sure if that was him, but I read this before, probably 6 or 7 years ago. I actually came across it over 20 years ago when I was in youth ministry. And it's one of those stories, it's almost like a parable that really has stuck with me for years. So I want to, if you'll indulge me for just a few minutes. It says, in that place between wakefulness and dreams, I found myself in the room. There were no distinguishing features, save for one wall covered with small index card files. They were like the ones in the libraries that list titles by author or subject in alphabetical order. But these files, which stretched from floor to ceiling and seemingly endless in either direction, had very different headings. As I drew near the wall of files, the first to catch my attention was one that read, "Girls I Have Liked." I opened it and I began flipping through the cards. I quickly shut it, shocked to realize that I had recognized the names written on each card. And then, without being told, I knew exactly where I was. This lifeless room with its small files was a crude catalog system for my life. Here were written the actions of my every moment, both big and small, in detail that my memory couldn't match. A sense of wonder and curiosity, coupled with horror, stirred within me as I began randomly opening up files and exploring their content. Some brought joy and sweet memories. Others, a sense of shame and regret so intense that I would look over my shoulder to see if anyone was watching. A file named Friends was next to a file named Friends I Have Betrayed. The titles ranged from the mundane to the outright weird. Books I've read, lies that I have told, comfort that I have given, jokes that I'd laughed about. Some were almost hilarious at their exactness, things that I yelled at my brothers. Other things I couldn't laugh at, things that I've done in my anger, things that I've muttered under my breath at my parents. I never ceased to be surprised by their contents. Often there were many more cards than expected, sometimes fewer than I had hoped. I was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of life that I'd lived. Could it be possible that in my time of 20 years to write each of these thousands or millions of cards? But each card confirmed this truth. Each one was written in my own handwriting, each signed by my own signature. When I pulled out the file marked songs I've listened to, I realized that the files grew to contain their contents. The cards were packed tightly, and yet after 2 or 3 yards, I hadn't found the end of the file. I shut it, shamed, not so much by the quality of the music, but more by the vast amount of time that I knew it represented. When I came to a file marked Lustful Thoughts, I felt a chill run through my body. I pulled the file out only an inch, not willing to test its size. And as I drew a card out, I shuddered at its detailed content. I felt sick to think that such a moment had been recorded. An almost animal rage broke out on me. One thought dominated my mind. No one must ever see these cards. No one must ever see this room. I have to destroy them. In an insane frenzy, I yanked out the file. Its size didn't matter now. I had to empty it out and burn the cards. But as I took it out on one end and began pounding it on the floor, I couldn't dislodge a single card. I became desperate and pulled out a card only to find out it was strong as steel when I tried to tear it. Defeated and utterly helpless, I returned the file to its slot. Leaning my forehead against the wall, I let out a long, self-pitying sigh. Then I saw it. The title bore, People I've Shared the Gospel with. The handle was brighter than those around it, newer, almost unused. I pulled on its handle and a small box not more than 3 inches long fell into my hands. I could count the cards it contained on one hand. And then the tears came to my eyes. And I began to weep. Sobs so deep that they started in my stomach and shook through me. I fell on my knees and cried. I cried out in shame from the overwhelming shame of it all. The rows of file shells swirled in my tear-filled eyes. No one must ever, ever know of this room. I must lock it up and hide the key. But then, as I pushed away the tears, I saw him. No, please, not him, not here. Oh, anyone but Jesus. I watched helplessly as he began to open the files and read the cards. I couldn't bear to watch his response. In the moments I could bring myself to look at his face, I saw a sorrow deeper than my own. He seemed to intuitively go to the worst boxes. Why did he have to read every one? Finally, he turned and looked at me from across the room. He looked at me with pity in his eyes. But this wasn't a pity that angered me. And I dropped my head. I covered my face with my hands and I began to cry again. He walked over and he put his arm around me. He could have said so many things, but he didn't say a word. He just sat there and he cried with me. Then he got up and walked back to the wall of files. Starting at one end of the room, he took out a file and one by one, he began to sign his name on each card. No! I shouted, rushing to him. All I could say was, "No, no," as I pulled the card from him. His name shouldn't be on these cards, but there it was, written in red, so rich, so dark, so alive. The name of Jesus covered mine. It was written with his blood. He gently took the card back. He smiled a sad smile and began to sign the cards. I don't think I'll ever understand how he did it so quickly, but in the next instant, it seemed, I heard him close the last file, and he walked back to my side. He placed his hand on my shoulder and he said, "It is finished." I stood up, and he led me out of the room. There was no lock on its door. There are still cards to be written. I think of this so often, and I think about not only the idea that our thoughts, our words, our actions are all recorded. And not only think about the fact that Jesus knows about all those little moments, those shameful moments, those heartbreaking moments. He chose to put his name on it. That's what the cross did. Jesus became sin for all of us, which means he took your sin. It didn't disappear. He took it. He was assigned the name of the sinner who committed those crimes. Your sins and my sins, the sins of all the world, piled up, all of those little card catalog rooms, each one of those. Jesus says, "I will sign my name on it." What I love so much about this story is it brings me to shame to think about it. But it brought Jesus to the cross. Your sin, those actions, is what led him to say, "I have to go down and save these people." Not how good you were, or how nice you were, or your church attendance, your political views. He says, I came for the people who are absolutely broken and lost and hurting and drowning in sin. It's those sins that I came for. To take them away, to carry them, so that he could sign his name over yours. I wanted to start off with this story because I want us to think about, again, it's so hard to separate the fact from Jesus is the one who judges, is Jesus as the comforter, and Jesus is the one who loves us. Will there be a final judgment day? Absolutely. But the judgment is going to be based on who those sins are assigned to. Are you carrying those sins? Or have you said, "I want Jesus to take my sins away. I want to be washed clean, and I want him to be the one who bears my sins"? And so as we get into a conversation, a dialogue of where might Jesus be in your daily life, I don't want you to get caught up into, but he's the one who's going to look at me with shame and disgust. He's going to look at me and say, I chose you. And so I say it's having fun. I don't know if you're going to find it fun. But as I was going through this, I started imagining all these scenarios in which what would happen, how might your minute be different if you realized that Jesus was right there with you. And I just want you to think about this. It's going to require your imagination, your creativity, and it's going to require your participation. And so I want us to imagine a scenario. And they can be random scenarios. They can be personal scenarios. I have a few here. But I want us to think about how we live life how we handle a situation. And then I want us to imagine, okay, what if Jesus was right there beside us in that situation? What would change? Okay? So I want us to, can I say have fun with that? But I want us to think about what would be different. How would that situation be different if you believe that Jesus was right there beside you? Okay? So we'll just start off with a place that everybody's going to start off tomorrow. It's going to be Monday morning. I know, I'm sorry, Jennifer. I should not have said it. Monday is coming. It's just around the corner. Okay? The alarm is going to go off. For some of you, that alarm is going to go off somewhere around 5 in the morning, maybe 4. Sorry, AG, 4:15. Okay, you're going to get up. Okay, I want you to imagine what's the first thing that you think of when that alarm. Wait, hang on. Let me say something, folks. We're in a church building. Okay, so I want to preface this on this specific question. We are in a church building. Okay, so let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth. So just be careful when you think about this. You may need to monitor your thinking, but like, what's the first thought you have when you hear the alarm going off at 5:15 in the morning? Coffee. 5 more minutes. Is anybody else in here set their clock 5 minutes fast on purpose so they know that they get an extra 5 minutes? You're good people. You are good people. Just 5 more minutes. If I can just have 5 more minutes. How many of you wake up and your first thought is, this is the day that the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. How many that your very first thought? Now you may think that after coffee. Okay, you may think that after but like, what's your first thought? And I want you to imagine, what if you woke up and you realized that sitting right there beside you on the bed, Jesus is like right there. Good morning. Wouldn't that be really exciting? Wouldn't that bring you great comfort? I mean, like, wait, Jesus, can you give me a few minutes? Like, kind of need to brush my teeth. I don't feel real good. Like, just give me a few minutes. So let's fast forward just a little bit. Okay, I'll skip the singing in the shower. Okay, like you're now sitting at the breakfast table. How many of you, I don't know if this is an embarrassing question. Does any of y'all eat breakfast alone? Do we have anybody who sits at the breakfast table and eats alone? I'm raising my hand because I eat alone. I would eat with my wife, but like I said, she gets up at 5:15. I don't. Okay. And so she eats breakfast, but then I'll go sit down before I take the girls or take Lily to school. I eat breakfast by myself every morning. 4 eggs and a bowl of oatmeal. There's nothing wrong with that. All of a sudden, I feel really embarrassed for saying that out loud. I should have just said eggs. I should have said I had some eggs. Can we rewind this for a second? I ate a few eggs in the morning. Yeah, God, thanks. He just pointed out this is being recorded. Surely we can edit this. I eat eggs for breakfast. I sit down at the table, and I always sit down at the table by myself. And I'm thinking about any number of things. I don't eat cereal anymore. When I eat cereal, I always read the box. And I don't know why. I don't know why I would do it. I would read the box. There was nothing on that box that was any way beneficial to me. But, you sit down and you start reading the box and try not to read what's in it, but everything else about it. But what if you go to sit down at that table, that breakfast table, and all of a sudden, like, Jesus walks in and he sits down beside you? And I don't know what he looks like. That's not important. But I have been watching The Chosen. And so that's my new vision, my new image of what Jesus looks like. And we know that's not probably what he looks like at all. Okay, but, so I imagine him sitting there, right there. And I just wonder, like, what's the first thing that I'm going to say if I know that Jesus is right there beside me? I heard somebody say, thank you. Thank you. Are you sure about that? I mean, thank you's the first thing you think to say? You're a good woman. Who was it? Who was... I apologize. Who prayed this morning? Lynn. Lynn prayed. He said, thank you for the troubles that we're going through. Really? I mean, is that, do you hear that very often? God, thank you for the troubles that I'm going through. But, you know, we can go back and look and, you know, suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint. You know. Is it biblical to pray for troubles? Absolutely. Is it deeply theological? You betcha. But that's not easy to do. So the first thing you're thinking, Barb, is thank you.
Yeah, not thank you for the troubles.
Okay. But you're still thankful for Tim.
Oh,
yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, when you said you weren't thankful for troubles, and I didn't know if he was in that category or not. Amen. What? Can we talk for just a second? I mean, you're going to have to imagine you're sitting down at breakfast, and all of a sudden Jesus pulls up a chair. And he sits down with you. How does the conversation go? What do you say? You offering your eggs? Wow. Do what? I have plenty, so I can share my eggs. Yeah, are you really here? Like, I just want to make sure about this. Like, you're really here. Just, what would you say? You would probably faint. Fall down on your knees. Thanks for being here. Yeah. Can you hang around for lunch?
I just say, wow.
Wow. Like just almost be speechless. Like, you're really here. I mean, I'm sorry, if Jesus shows up for breakfast, I'm calling in sick. Like, I'm not going into work. I mean, Angie, Bob, Lance is not here. I mean, I love these people. They're great people. But if Jesus is at my breakfast table, I'm not going to be like, hey, you know what? You know, I've got to get busy. I'm like, no, can we talk? How much time do you have? Yeah, I have so many questions. I have so many ways I want to say thank you. I would just want to talk. Can we just talk a little more? Hey, remember that time that you did this miracle? And I think I'd have some questions that I would want to ask him about my life and some struggles that I've had in my faith. Some unanswered prayers. You've got them, right? Do you have those unanswered prayers? You know, I prayed some things that, as far as in my own understanding, it was with all the faith that I could muster. And I don't know if it was just being naive or whatever, but I thought God is going to answer this prayer. I believe it. I have no doubt about it. And he didn't answer it the way I wanted it answered. And a lot of those times, those answers led to a funeral. And you know, I want to talk about that. I want to have that conversation. And I want to tell him that I love him. I want to tell him that I'm thankful. I want to tell him that I'm just not worthy. I want to tell him, don't ever leave. I want to ask him, how do I handle some of these situations? How do I deal with people? How do I help some people that I love who don't believe in him? What can I do? Jesus, can you help me out on this one? I need a miracle. Because they just don't believe. And I would love for you to do something. Will you go with me? I mean, listen, we can walk on water on the way there, you know? Have you thought about the questions that you would ask? So, okay, we're going to go ahead and leave the breakfast table. But I want you to keep thinking about that. Okay, so now it's going to get a little more difficult. We're now getting into the car. Okay, and I'm going to make it even worse. Some of you are going to have to go back a little bit. But you're now taking your child to school. You know where I'm going with this. You have an adolescent in the car with you who they might not claim to be perfect, but they're pretty sure they're, omniscient. They know everything. That was the terrible thing about leaving my teens is at one time I knew everything. And so you've got this kid, and then you're navigating through traffic. Maddie, you just smiled like, oh yeah, like you know what that's like. I'm not a nice person when I drive, and it's I don't want to say that because you're going to think I'm a terrible person. When I see somebody driving through in front of the high school at 30 miles an hour, and there are kids crossing the street, like I don't do anything vulgar, but I will honk my horn. I will lay on my horn and be like, slow down. Like you are going to hit some kid and it's going to end their life and you're going to be in jail the rest of your life. Just slow down. Say, what if Jesus was right there with me? Like, how would I handle that situation? Because I'm pretty sure, like, he would look at me like I was James and John. Anybody remember James and John? What was their names? Their nicknames? Sons of Thunder. Like, we don't know for sure how they got those names. We don't know if, like, their dad was Thunder, like he was crazy. But we think, like, they're always looking for a fight. And you'll remember at one point in time, do you remember what they asked Jesus to do? They were going through Samaria, and there's a town that didn't believe Jesus, and what did they want to do? Call down fire? Like honestly, if Jesus sat in the car with me and he did what I wanted him to do, there would be like a permanent, like, black spot in front of the crosswalk where people are driving through like maniacs. And just God, just you know. Again, I've been watching some of The Chosen. I'm in season 2 where they're James and John. They get really upset and they're like, they want to call down thunder. And Jesus was like, really? Like, that's what you wanted to do? He's like, yeah, you kind of got a lot to learn. What kind of conversations, how would you respond if Jesus was right there with you? Okay, so now we've left that and now we're on into work. And we're walking into the place we work or the place that you used to work. Maybe you're retired now. Or you're walking in where you have coffee with your friends at McDonald's. You know, and you go to sit down and all of a sudden you're in front of people. Can you imagine, like, you opening up the door to walk into your place of business and like Jesus walks right beside you? It's like, I'm going to kind of just, I'll be with you today. What are you thinking? How do I explain this? Like, do you introduce him? And how do you introduce him? This is the guy that I sing to on Sundays. This is the guy that I pray to. This is the one that I love. This is the one who saved my life. Let me introduce you to Jesus. He completely changed my life, and he can change yours too. I suspect there's some people at your work that you may not like. I don't want to go too far, but there's probably some people that just kind of maybe frustrate you, that maybe annoy you. Have you ever thought, like, Jesus, don't go talk to them? Like, stay away from them. You're mine. Don't don't go help them out. They say your name a lot, but not the way you want them to. Like for the person that you struggle with, the one that has been hurtful to you, the one who says things to you behind your back, would you be like, hey, I want you to know who Jesus is because he can completely change your life. Because I want you to experience eternal bliss like I get to experience eternal bliss because of him. He offers it out, and I want you to have it too. Would you want to do that? Can you think of some people who you're like, I don't know that I want that person to know Jesus because they don't deserve him? The way that they treated me, the way that they treated my family, the way that they do business, the way that they live life, they're not good enough for him.
They really need him.
Yeah, I think that they do. What if Jesus was, and I don't know your scenarios. I mean, some of you are working, some of you are retired, some of you, you stay at home or whatever it is that you're doing. I want you to imagine, while you're sitting down in the afternoon, you go to turn on the TV, and Jesus is sitting there with you. I would feel really weird about watching TV with Jesus. Does anybody else feel weird about that? Anybody else feel weird about, hey, you want to watch TV? I've got this really great show on TV I want you to see. You're going to love it. Is there anything, like all of a sudden, like I'm freaked out thinking about, okay, what would I want him to, like, I mean, I'm kind of a weirdo. I like to watch, like how things work, how things are built. I love history. I think that would be cool. Like, hey, what really happened there? Like, tell me what, you were there. You know what it was like when, people were in the battlefield. You think you could tell some stories about that? About the cries and the pleas that he heard? I mean, there's so many questions I would want to ask. John?
I think one of the most beneficial things to that opportunity would be to see how he responded to the things that we experience in our life today.
Okay, so give me an example.
Well, the shows that we see on television display a certain culture that we often cringe at. And so it'd be interesting to see how he responded to that, whether he just condemned it outright, or whether or not he said, well, people are still people. They're just the way they are. And, I'd just like to see what his response to these things really is.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they ought to be one thing or ought to be the other thing, but I think we all struggle with what's the right thing to do in a culture today that challenges our values.
Yeah.
And if you understand that there's nothing new under the sun, although some of these things might shock us, they might not shock you quite as much because he's seen it all.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and when he was on earth, he was in a very, very corrupt society. There was abuse, there was neglect, there was slavery. Like, there were some terrible, terrible, terrible things that were taking place. Remember, he grew up, basically in an occupied country. Right? He had to deal with people who'd come in to enforce laws on them that cared nothing for the nation. So we talked about this a year or so ago, but if you can imagine, this is like Russia or China, just in our own minds, coming here, living here, taxing us, right? Telling us how we can live, telling us how we can worship, overtaxing us, sending money back. That was the climate that he lived in. And people were fighting. Churches were fighting. Like there was this hierarchy where, and there was all sorts of sickness. And almost anything you got just basically was a death sentence. There was zero medication. Like if you got something, like several years ago, I started having terrible pain. Some of you may remember. I don't even remember that day. I preached that day and then went and sat down, and then ended up like a few days later, I ended up having my gallbladder removed. If I had lived in that time, that was a death sentence. I was just listening to a podcast, and they're talking about having children and how scary that was, because the death rate among both infants and mothers in that time was incredibly high. It was very common for women to die during childbirth. He grew up in that time. So yeah, he experienced some of the heartache and pain that we feel today. And so to say that he's oblivious to that, I think I would be like, what do you think about this? And he didn't address a lot of the things that I think we assumed, or at least wished he would have addressed. He didn't talk about taxes. It was a terribly corrupt government. Like, I'm sorry. We have a lot of people, and I'm not pleased with where America's going. But the bottom line is, America is not the church is the church. And we're supposed to be the ones who glorify God. And as much as I would love to have a nation that follows suit, that's not why America was created. The church was created to glorify God. And there are a lot of people who are upset with the way the government works. I'm not real proud of it. But I'm saying, like, some of the things that went on, that are like documented, that went on in those early centuries, like they would literally, it was awful. I don't even want to talk about it. But there was abuse on a level that we cannot even imagine about what leaders would do. Pull children out of the houses of the families and take them in to the palace, and where they would live a few months before they were killed for the pleasure of the king. And surprisingly, Jesus does not address that. Why does he not address that? I think he's saying, look, the way Rome operated then, the way the U.S. operates now, none of that is permanent. None of that is going to go on. Like what I'm offering, what I'm talking about, and he said this over and over again, I have an eternal kingdom, a kingdom that will not pass away. And just about everybody else around him said, we have no idea what you're talking about. You're the king. We've got this great kingdom plan for you, and it starts off with you taking out Rome. We've got to get rid of these knuckleheads. That's not the word that they would have used. It would have been in Greek or Aramaic, but it still would have been a word that I couldn't translate today. But what if God were right there with you? What if you knew that Jesus was right beside you when you're waiting for that phone call? When you're waiting to go into the doctor's office? How would it change if you're sitting in the waiting room and you're alone, and all of a sudden Jesus comes and sits down right beside you? Would that change your thinking? I would think that there's some times in your life that if Jesus showed up, you just might collapse in his arms. And you might say, I don't know that I can handle this. It's just too much. We've listed just a handful of scenarios. I want you to think about your own life. But I want you to alter it just a little bit. I want you to stop asking what if. What if Jesus is with you at the breakfast table? What if Jesus is with you in the car? What if Jesus is with you when you walk in to your office? What if Jesus is with you when you're in the hospital? What if Jesus is with you in the midst of your arguments? Jesus is with you. And we're going to talk about this next week. One of the greatest ways that we can share the love of Jesus is in the way that we deal with other people in relationships. What if we invited Jesus into our relationships? But for this week, I want to ask you, maybe you set a little beeper on your watch so that every hour it beeps, or you send yourself an email, or you write something down and you say, Jesus is right here with me. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. What if you started believing that the Lord your God is with you? He is the mighty warrior. He takes great delight in you. He quiets you with his love. He rejoices over you. He sings over you. That's not a what if. That is a statement. God is with us. That is the story of Jesus. When he comes, he shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us. That's why Jesus changed everything when he came. Because before that, God was far off. Nobody that you couldn't see him, you couldn't go near him, you couldn't look at him. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes down and says, I am God. I'm the Son of God. I give you access to my Father through me. That access was available to no one. You go back to John chapter 4. Well, we have to go to Jerusalem to worship, but they won't let us go up there to worship. So we have no way to worship God except we have to go up on our own mountain, which you say is not good enough. And Jesus says, there will come a time where you're going to worship me in spirit and truth. I'm going to be right here. We're living in that time. Jesus is right here with us. You're going to walk out the door. He's going with you. And so the question is, are you going to invite him into your life? Or are you just going to be like, well, you know what? Hey, you can follow me. You can be here. Just let you know, I'm not going to talk to you until Sunday. Okay, at nighttime, you get a 30-second prayer or however long until I nod off. That's the time I'm going to spend with you. I just want you to think about Jesus is here with you. And again, I mentioned this morning, and some of you may not remember or know the reference. Joe was a minister in Sweetwater I worked under. I love the guy. He was a dear friend. He was just one of my best friends, definitely my mentor, my hero, and he passed away of a brain tumor. And just I would love to go back. And I'm almost ashamed to think how much I just want to go back and see him. And think about, but Jesus says, I'm right here with you. I want to have that same desire to have that conversation with Jesus. And to think that he's following me around. He's right there with me. He says, I'll be with you in tough times. David says, I can't get away from you. If I go up the heavens, you're there. If I go down to Sheol, you're there, If I rise up to the heavens, if I make my bed in the depths of the sea, you're always there with me. And so I want you to think about that this week. I want you to think about when you walk into a situation, I want you to think about, Jesus is right here with me. And let that give you comfort. Let that give you peace. Let that give you strength. Let that show you love to people who you think might not deserve it. Show kindness to people who drive too fast going down the road. And let us be a people who share Jesus with other people. Invite Jesus into your daily life. And for some of you, maybe the best thing that you can do is just start intentionally planning time to spend it with Him. Just say, this is my time with you. Get up early, stay up late, turn off the TV, walk away from your desk, and say, this is, you're here. I want to acknowledge that you're here. I invite you in conversation. I just want to say, here's what's going on in my life. And be willing to share that with Him. I hope you will consider doing that this week. I do want to close out in prayer before we go out, and also remind you, we will be meeting on Wednesday night. For those of you who are able, you can worship with us in several different ways. Of course, you can come here and worship. We'll be here at 6 o'clock. Also, if you're unable to come here, we'd love to worship with you online. You can go on to Facebook or YouTube. We have links for those out as well. If you happen to miss one of those and you feel encouraged or uplifted by listening to those, you can always go back. We have those archived, and you can go back through and watch those. And then tomorrow morning also, just want to encourage you again to hop onto Facebook and join us as a church as we go through a verse for the week. And I haven't picked out the verse for the week, so I've got to do a little reading of my own and pick one out. Unless you jump in and have one of your own you can share with me. I'll even go so far to say is if you want to even record the video, you're welcome to do that too. You can come up here with me. I'll set up the camera and you can share the verse for the week, or you can tell me whatever you feel comfortable with. But I want y'all all to consider, all y'all, to join me in that this week. Let's close out in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Father God, I thank you for always being there with us. I thank you that you are a God who surrounds us, who loves us, who has promised that there's never a place that we can go too high or too low, that you're not there with us, that our sin, our shortcomings, our histories, our failures, our ignorance, none of that can separate us from the love that you have for us in Jesus Christ. And so I want to thank you for that. Jesus, I want to thank you for choosing to be with us, to live among us, to live inside us. Lord, I pray that as we now wake up in the morning, we will begin our day knowing that you're right there with us. As we find ourselves at the breakfast table, as we're planning out our day, may we have you within our plans. As we give thanks for what we have, may we thank you at that moment for the day that you've provided, for the day that you've already been in, and for the promises that you have for tomorrow. Lord, we're going to go out this week, and some of us are going to have a terrible week. And we may have bad news at home or at work or just be overwhelmed. Lord, you have called us in those times where we are burdened and we are weak, we are exhausted. You say, come to you. And so, Lord, I just pray that we'll do that. Lord, may we, lastly, I just pray that we share you with other people. That we're not afraid to share your name and your love and your promise with other people, so that they can have that same joy and grace in their life that we get to experience because of your Son. It's all in his name that I pray. Amen. Thank you again for being here. We look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. And then on Sunday, you're dismissed.